Welcome to the PharmaSource podcast.
The CMC development process remains one of the most expensive and time-consuming bottlenecks in drug development. Even with decades of process optimization and automation advances, companies still face persistent challenges around raw material variability, data accessibility, and CDMO technical capability, issues that can derail timelines and burn through limited funding. Siddhartha Jain has spent 2 decades in Biologics CMC across Novartis, Regeneron, Sanofi, and other major companies, contributing to the development and manufacturing of over 10 clinical and commercial molecules. Since 2023, he's been working as an independent consultant, advising early and late-stage companies on CMC strategy, CDMO selection, and digital transformation. In this episode, we dig into the technical and strategic challenges that don't get enough attention, why raw material variability is still catching companies off guard at scale, what actually makes a CDMO technically proficient versus just experienced, and why digital CMC isn't just about efficiency, but about making better decisions faster. Sid, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this podcast.
So let's start with you then. Just walk me through your background, please.
Absolutely. I'm a CMC professional with 2 decades of experience in protein biologics, ranging from process development to manufacturing of the drugs. And as you mentioned, I worked with various global leading biopharmaceutical companies, and I have been involved with commercialization of a number of drugs that are helping patients with a range of diseases. During the course of my work, I have focused on bringing new capabilities within the companies, driving technology transfer, solving complex problems, etc. For last over 2 years, I have been doing CMC consulting. I'm leading Shoolin Management Company, and the company, it's a consulting company that focuses on CMC strategy and innovation. Under this, I have had, in the last over 2 years, I've had a diversity of clients ranging from early stage companies to late stage companies, technology companies, and health authority.
As you said, you work with companies at various different stages. But what's the first conversation like when an early stage biotech comes to you?
That's an interesting question. So when a biotech company comes to me, and especially an early stage company that comes to me, what is most important is that we have a good planning. So for any company, and more so for the early stage companies, I like to know more about them. I like to know more about their platform, their pipeline, what are their constraints, where they are in terms of funding, because funding drives a lot of things, especially in the last few years. And then looking at what their timeline is. What are their constraints? What are they looking for? Because depending on what the company's plan is, what their strategy is, what their timeline is, the need for CMC and what I can offer to them can change. And that helps us define the scope of work, how I can support the early stage companies, and so on and so forth. So that is the number one usually do with the early stage companies. The other thing I do is I give them a ballpark estimate of how much it would take to carry a drug to clinic in terms of time and money, so that we are on the same point. We shouldn't have massive difference in our expectations. So that is something I give them, and then also share with them some of the watchouts, some of the things that they should be thinking about or taking into account before CMC actually even becomes a reality. One piece of advice I generally give early on to the early stage companies is to leverage the outsourced vendors in terms of CROs and CDMOs rather than invest in physical facilities early on, because what it does is it burns the capital, especially the limited capital these days that they have, and then prevents them from moving their pipeline forward.
How do you find people take that advice when you say make sure to rely on CROs, CDMOs? Are they often surprised by that and think that they should have been building their in-house capabilities, or do they have concerns, reservations?
Generally, what I have seen is that the desire, and historically our field has been like that, is to build internal physical facilities. But more often than not, especially more recently with the funding being a constraint, I'm seeing more and more companies being open to that idea of leveraging outsourced vendors.
So from your experience, why do early biotechs tend to prefer the idea of building in-house?
So it's not necessarily they are preferring to build in-house. It's just an inherent preference because they have seen other companies with large facilities. It looks nice. It looks attractive. Everyone has the desire of having a physical location, many employees, part of their organization, labs. But more than that, they are also thinking about having flexibility to do the research that they want, to be able to push the programs without having to depend on somebody else. So, in their mind, the thought is that if I have control over my own processes, I can do what I want when I want to do. I am not dependent on others. There is another thought that the operational cost could be lower because we are not paying for the profits of the outsourced vendors. So there is merit to that idea. It just comes down to whether the pipeline is full enough to justify that investment so that we can pay back for the capital expense. And in order to have the physical facility and to have that much of pipeline, it also means that the companies need to have that much of funding to be able to sustain that. So it's a catch-22 situation. That's why my recommendation generally has been start with outsourced vendors, get to the critical mass, and then you can slowly start to build piece by piece your physical internal capability.
And so, as you mentioned, it's no secret that funding, the last few years has been really, really difficult in this space. How have you found that changing what companies prioritize in their CMC strategy?
So there has been quite a bit of change in how the companies are perceiving and pursuing their activities. So let me just start by going back before the funding constraint started, when the liquidity was high, and just look at how things were done at that point. And not every company was operating that way, so I'm going to generalize in some ways of how companies were operating. So when the liquidity was high, the companies were more flexible and open to building their internal facilities early on. And for the same reason that I mentioned, that they wanted to have their own platform development, they wanted to progress their own pipeline at their own pace and everything. And then they were also pursuing a lot of programs, many programs. Their pipeline was big. They were pursuing several programs at once. Just if you take an example, that many companies that I came across, even during the tail end of COVID, during the tail end of pandemic, they were still working on a COVID drug. So you can imagine that the importance for them was the prioritization of the programs was not necessarily as high as it is becoming now. And then what was also happening was that the level of planning was not as detailed because the companies knew that when they start to run out of funds, they could go back and they could raise more funds. And because of that, CMC was not usually a core part of the planning. It was more of an afterthought. Now, fast forward, we look at the scenario when the funding has been tight. And what I'm seeing with my clients is that they're leaning more and more towards the virtual model as opposed to building physical facilities. They are more selective in terms of the programs they want to pursue because every program that is not going to get funding or that is not going to be pursued is taking money away from the one that can be progressed further. And the planning is much more detailed because they know that it will be difficult to go back to the investors and get a large chunk of money again anytime soon, and the process could be longer. And because of that, CMC is becoming a core element of the discussion because as CMC costs are the highest costs in getting to the IND. So the companies are planning early on how much it would take, how long it would take to get to the clinic. That includes CMC costs. And now the whole perspective from in terms of the planning has changed as the funding has tightened.
Let's move on to talk about CDMO selection for a minute. When a company is selecting a CDMO, what is the difference between a CDMO that may claim experience but ones that is actually technically proficient?
So broadly, when I look at the CDMOs, you can categorize them in three buckets. One is the ones that are small, they are new, they're getting business just to start gaining experience. They're reaching out to the clients and they're upfront that we are new, we are hungry. We have people who have experience, but we personally don't have as much experience. So that is one category. And that you can clearly identify. Then there is a category of CDMOs who have run many programs, multiple programs, and then they will be citing those programs, of course, confidentially, not declaring, sharing the confidential details, but they will be talking about how much experience they have in terms of number of molecules they have progressed to clinic or to later stage clinical studies. And then there are CDMOs that are going to that have experience not only with executing the programs, but they have seen the diversity of challenges that come with executing program. And now where's the difference between the second and the third category is that we know that every program is unique. And in the course of executing the program, we will see some challenges. We will see some atypical performance. The companies that are experienced will try to run through the standard set of solving the challenge, and then they will give up and they will usually try to just move with the suboptimal situation, suboptimal process. On the other hand, the company that is technically proficient will be able to understand what is the reason why they saw an atypical performance. What about the process can be modified, can be changed to mitigate that risk. And they will be able to help us make the process only stronger as we go along. So that is where it's a fine detail because both are experienced, both are running. It's more about scientific culture that exists within the organization where they're not just taking the result on the face value, but also going back and understanding why did we have this deviation? Why did we have this atypical performance? What can we do to mitigate this? So that now, if somebody asks, how do I know which one is what? My experience has been that it is very difficult to find that. The only way one can find out which is a technically proficient CDMO is either through personal experience or through reference from somebody who has actually seen that a CDMO was able to take a step back when there was an atypical performance, when there was a complex investigation or such, and they were able to study it and resolve it. So that is the way I would say you will be able to differentiate between the experience and the technical proficient. There's no magic bullet on that.
So basically relying on peers with experience of working with them.
Either directly or through somebody who has worked and can give you a reference.
So you've worked on some very complex technical investigations with CDMOs. What does that process actually look like when maybe things go a bit wrong?
First, understand what the complex technical investigations are. So during manufacturing, there is always it's routine to see certain deviations happen that lead to investigations. And many of them tend to be more of operational in nature. Something was missed, something happened, and that can be resolved because there is a direct link between the cause and effect. However, complex technical investigations are like black swan. They are unpredictable. They come up, but there is no direct link between cause and effect. And now they require a detailed understanding, technical understanding of why they happen and how can we solve them. So that is basically where it goes. Some of the cases that I have experienced are where you would see a deviation happen in drug product, but the root cause is in drug substance. So you can keep looking within drug product what may have caused it until you can find that from a scientific perspective, the cause was within drug substance. Or another instance, and I had published a paper several years ago in Bioprocess International on that, was where we had multiple raw materials being used in cell culture. We saw an atypical performance, but we couldn't figure out which one is causing it. And then we had to again do a much more detailed technical review on that. So anytime there is a complex technical investigation, some of the standard work is always going to happen. You're going to review the batch records, you're going to review what materials were used, anything that was out of normal in terms of the procedures that were used. There will be retesting of the samples. You're going to look at the historical data, compare this performance with the historical performance, looking at the design space. All of those standard things will happen. But now what is going to happen in complex technical investigation is you're going to take a much more a broader view. You're going to first of all form a cross-functional team because now it is not just manufacturing or MSAT team, but it could involve process development, formulation development, analytical development, QC. All these teams could be involved. You may be also engaging the vendor if raw material could be a potential root cause of this. And then you could extract the impurity, if it is an impurity, and characterize it using some deep analytical techniques. You may be looking at other aspects to see what may be happening in the process, and then based on that, develop some hypotheses, replicate what has been seen at the manufacturing scale, at the small scale, because the studies will be done on small scale. So if we can't replicate, then we cannot resolve it. Once we have replicated, then find a solution, scale it back, whether it is done internally, whether it is done through the vendor. So you can see that it is something that is more, it's like a science project. And there is no linear path on it where it will go or how it will go. And as a result of that, these complex technical investigations can take months. And I've been part of some that have taken over a year also. And when that happens, there is a risk to program timelines as well. And that is where it goes to your previous question that if we have a CDMO that is technically proficient, they can help us resolve the complex technical investigations faster so that there is a minimal impact to the program timelines than be just with an experienced but not technically proficient CDMO.
Raw material is something, obviously, we talked about quite a bit when we met a few weeks ago. Why is variability in raw materials such a challenge for companies, and how does it manifest during drug manufacturing?
So when we look at the manufacturing process, what has happened over several years, like decades, is that we have gotten a very good control over the process design through QBD studies and everything. We understand the processes. We also have a very good control over the equipment and facilities. We have now sensors, we do real-time monitoring, we have control systems and all. But one thing, which is the third input into the process, is raw materials. And this is something that we source from outside. We don't have a direct control on the raw materials. We don't control the supply chain. We don't necessarily know every element, every impurity that is present in the raw material. And anytime there is a shift in the composition of the raw materials, especially the complex ones such as polysorbate or nick and such, which are polymeric in nature, if there is a shift in composition, if there is a new impurity or a shift in the quantity of an impurity, it can have an impact on cell culture performance in terms of cell growth. It can have an impact on the titers. It can have an impact on column packing efficiency. It can have an impact on purification efficiency. Many of those different kind of things can impact the yield of the process. So depending on the impurity, it can have an impact on process performance or product quality. One thing I just want to highlight here for the purpose of our audience, that when we talk about raw materials, they can be categorized in 6 buckets, just so we know what we are referring to when we say raw materials. These would be the single-use systems, the plastic bags like wave bags, wave bioreactors, single-use bioreactors, mixing bags and such. There would be cell culture media. Then there would be chromatography resins. There would be membranes. Then there would be the salts and chemicals, which we use to make buffers and adjustments to the load solution and such. And then lastly, excipients. Excipients can be called as chemicals as well, but because they actually go into the patients, I'm keeping them as a separate. So we use a lot of raw materials through the process, and they're coming from many different vendors. And the vendors may be sourcing some of the components from their vendors. And any variability anywhere in the whole chain could have an impact on how our process is performing. So that's where the raw material becomes complex, and it many times can be part of the black swan complex technical investigations.
And why would raw material variability tend to show up at scale rather than during the development phase?
I would say from my experience, there are 2 reasons why that tends to happen. First of all, when we are using raw materials at a smaller scale, we don't run through too many batches, too many lots of a raw material. Sometimes one batch of raw material is able to last us years, and we can use it for programs, not even just for one. And then even if you're using multiple lots during process development or in the labs, usually those raw materials have been made within a close span of time. So we don't see much of a shift or variation in the process at the raw material vendor. Now, when we go to the manufacturing scale, what ends up happening is that manufacturing is happening for years and years. And now we are using a lot more, many different lots over a period of time. So not only are we catching the variation across multiple lots, but we are also catching the variation over time. For example, if there is a drift in the process at the vendor, we may not see it at the small scale because we are using the batches that were made just 6 months apart. But now in manufacturing, we may be seeing batches that have been manufactured 5 years apart.
Right.
The other thing that happens is that at manufacturing scale, simply because of the scale, there are stresses, there are non-linearities in the process. And a small variation in the raw material can exacerbate those non-linearities. So we can see an impact on the shear on the cells in the production bioreactor, or even in seed trains setup in the big bioreactors, for example. Or we may see a change in column packing efficiency. We may see a change in the membrane performance. So when you go to a larger scale, simply because of the stresses that are involved, the non-linearities that are involved, those variations in raw material can exacerbate those effects.
How would you approach raw material variability sort of systematically? How do you identify it or, mitigate it, resolve it?
There is no single solution for that. It's more like a program. And in different organizations, I have supported or built the material science teams. And they're not just a small activity, they're a full program. And there are companies that have really mature programs, and it's even bigger than what I have personally experienced as well. There are multiple elements of managing raw material variability proactively. The first thing is obviously have a strong relationship with the supplier. As much as possible, learn about the supply chain. Now, the suppliers, the vendors may not want to share their full supply chain because of confidentiality, their proprietary nature. But whatever we can learn about the supply chain, the better it is. The second thing is that if we have a good relation, it would be helpful to learn from the vendors, from the suppliers, if they are seeing any shift in the process, if they're seeing any change in the process. It may not show a change in the value versus the specification. The value of an attribute may still be within specification, but they may be seeing a shift in the process, in the raw material. So the sooner we can learn about it, the better it would be, because then we can investigate and study what may be the impact of that shift in the raw material proactively. Then a big thing that can be done, and you may have heard the term called material quality attributes. So similar to what we have in the process, we have critical quality attributes.
Yeah.
So it's similar to that. There are material quality attributes. So understand what quality attributes of the raw material impacts process performance and product quality. Interestingly, not everything on the certificate of analysis of the raw material may be material quality attribute, and not everything that is a material quality attribute may be on the certificate of analysis.
Right. So how would you go about working what they are then?
So part of it is having a scientific understanding, which is built over time and with multiple programs, and gaining through the experience, through the literature of what quality attributes would be relevant. And there is some element of learning the hard way, through experience. We see something happen, we immediately realize this is impacting the process, and that becomes something that we monitor. So it's an ongoing process, it's a learning process that goes on. You can gather the data. Another thing is that if we know from the history or from literature that this attribute could be relevant, the vendor may not be monitoring, but we can monitor ourselves. And then if you're monitoring, then see if over a certain period of time, how does it change? Does it impact the process? If it doesn't, we can start monitoring it. So there could be different approaches. I would say it has to start with our own understanding of the science and process to have a starting point on this.
And would the quality attributes be different for each of those different buckets of raw materials you mentioned, or sort of the same across the board?
You would expect naturally that their quality attributes would be different. The quality attributes would be dependent on the specific raw material, and it could also be dependent on the point of usage of the raw material. You may be able to accept a high degree of impurity or lower degree of certain property of a raw material when it is being used as a buffer in process versus when you're using it as an excipient.
Yeah.
So it depends on a lot of factors, and based on that, it's a quite engaging process. And I would say it just happens once we start, it starts small and then it becomes big because we are using the prior experience to build that database of quality attributes.
Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about digital CMC. What does that mean?
So digital CMC, it's a very broad term. If you ask five people, you may end up getting five different definitions of digital CMC.
Yeah, exactly.
The definition I may give today could very well differ from a definition that another person may give to you. From my perspective, I see digital CMC as a journey, not as a state. And we have to start on that journey, and that itself is getting on digital CMC. And as we get on that journey, we continue to mature along that path. The way I define that journey of digital CMC is in terms of three stages. The first one, which is the fundamental one, is knowledge management and capture, which basically is making sure that all the data, all the knowledge that we're gathering is not on paper, but in a digital format. It could be like electronic lab notebook, electronic batch records, automatic data capture systems, all of those kind of things. They form part of knowledge management. Now, once we have that knowledge created, then we can move to the next level of stage of maturity, which is being able to use that data to predict performance. And that would involve things like having predictive models of the process, predictive stability of our drug product. So those kind of things. Now we are using the data, and using the data based on that, we have built a model. And then once we have done that, then we get to the next level of maturity, which is what everyone is talking about today, is artificial intelligence and automation, which can lead to having automated processes, because now we are able to predict and act upon that prediction to control the process, to be able to make the events happen as we intend them to happen. So, as you can see, this is a journey. We start with knowledge management, and as we mature, we move to the next stage and next stage. And different companies are at different stages of maturity with digital CMC, but all of them are having digital CMC in their own respect. Overall, the goal is that digital CMC is increasing the efficiency. It's reducing errors. It's improving compliance. And most importantly, it's bringing new insights about our product and process. Historically, we did statistical analysis where we were trying to figure out, based on this data, if there is a correlation. But now we are able to look at complex data sets and figure out what may be influencing what, even if they are not directly related to each other. So these kind of insights that we're getting is going to be a game changer as we go along, but it all starts with electronic digital knowledge management.
And so you worked on digital transformation across Sanofi's global CMC operations. What did you learn there that actually works versus maybe just what sounds good or is good on paper, but actually in practice maybe isn't the best sort of investment?
I'll share more of a general view on that, and that's certainly shaped by my experience driving digital transformation in the past. So when we say sounds good on paper, that basically is the viewpoint that many in industry tend to have, that let's make an investment, buy a digital product, get it installed, and now we are digital.
Yeah, you can put it in your marketing decks. We're digital.
Exactly. But when we look at digital transformation, it has three elements to it. It is the digital solution, people, and processes. So when we look at what sounds good on paper, we are not necessarily looking at the other two elements, which are people and processes. We have to make sure that when we are implementing a digital solution, either our processes are adapted to the digital solution or the digital solution is adapted to the processes. And there is a viewpoint also that we are trying to fit the digital solution to our inefficient current processes instead of redesigning our process, because that could be an opportunity for us to redesign our processes. But regardless of that, the digital solution has to align with the processes. The solution in the end has to be used by people. And this is where an important component is change management. So what we have to do is make sure that we are engaging the end users, getting feedback from them on the digital solution, the design of the solution. We are engaging them in terms of explaining what is a benefit to them on a day-to-day basis. What they care about is how it will improve their work, and how can we then explain to them the purpose of the digital solution, the value of the digital solution in those words that benefits them, that helps them in their routine work, and then carrying them along the journey. There will be always folks who will be fearful of the digital solution. There will be folks who will be hesitant. How can we work with them? How can the digital solution be simple enough that everyone along the range of digital maturity can use the solution seamlessly? And if we don't have a simple solution, how can we bring everyone to the minimum level of digital maturity so that everyone can adopt the solution and be part of this journey? Because even if one person is left out, that person may tend to use uh, the old paper-based solution first. So we have to carry everyone along. And that's what would be the successful digital transformation.
So if you're a mid-stage company with, relatively limited resources, where should you start in your sort of digital CMC investment?
So I would go back to the three stages of maturity of digital CMC that I mentioned earlier. And regardless of the size of the company, and more so for an early and mid-stage companies, I would say they should focus on knowledge management, the electronic digital knowledge management, because that is a fundamental layer. Once that has been achieved, then the subsequent layers will automatically happen. So I would say they should invest into that. There are a lot of solutions, several solutions that are already available in the market. In my work with the early stage companies, they are being proactive about it, especially the companies that are using artificial intelligence for designing the drugs. They want the data to be able to feed back into their drug design. So they are being more proactive in that respect. So that is happening. Some of the things that I would say they should take into account when selecting the solution is that they should make sure that the different solutions that they have, they're able to cross-talk. They're able to talk to each other. It's very easy to have piecemeal solutions that then don't talk to each other, and then we have silos created across the organization very quickly. The solution should be scalable, because as an early stage and mid stage company, they're going to grow. And as they grow, then we shouldn't be in a situation where the solution doesn't grow with our pipeline, with the number of users and such. And most importantly, as we move towards commercialization, the solution should be able to meet the compliance requirements that would be coming up in the future. So some of these things I would say the mid-sized companies should take into account. And I think once they start on the journey, it will just move forward on its own.
Finally, then, looking ahead into the future, where do you see the biggest opportunities in how the industry approaches CMC?
We just talked about digital and AI, and that's where I see the biggest opportunity to start with. And along with that, related to that is automation and robotics as well. So I see more and more implementation, adoption of digital AI automation in our process development, or rather broadly development and manufacturing. And once that happens, then it will, like I said, it will lead us to the next stages, subsequent stages of maturity, where we will be able to generate new insights, complex insights on our process, on our manufacturing operations, which will help us save cost, save time, become more efficient, increase the yield of the process, etc. Be able to improve the compliance, be able to engage the regulatory agencies with more insights around the process, being able to, for example, achieve a longer shelf life if we are able to use predictive stability and such. And in this regard, one thing that I want to highlight is that we talk about AI, and then there is always a fear that AI is going to take over the work that is being done by humans. But rather, intent and the opportunity would be to not look at it from the perspective of replacing humans, but looking at it from the perspective of providing new information, new insights that helps us our processes working alongside humans. So that is the biggest opportunity that I see. The other one that I am about is the closed end-to-end processing. And that can be facilitated through continuous manufacturing, which we are starting to hear more and more about in the recent years. The long-term advantage which I'm envisioning that could happen is that if we have a closed end-to-end processing, then the burden of environmental monitoring that we have in the facilities, the burden of maintaining clean rooms in the facilities can potentially go down. We are not there yet, but that's like the blue sky. And if we are able to move away from some of those requirements in terms of even just reducing the amount of testing or even reducing the amount of clean room requirements that we have, that can have a significant impact on the cost of building a new facility and cost of operating the facility. So these are some of the couple of opportunities that I can immediately see that could transform CMC within the biopharmaceutical industry.
Cool. Well, Sid, thanks for talking to me today. It's been really interesting.
It's a pleasure to join you on this podcast today.